Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you guys are looking for PTC geocodes, including the latest set Astral Radiance, make sure you check out the Potan store, where you can use code Omnipoke for 5% off your order. Today we're going to be taking a look at the top 16 results from the Melbourne Regional. This was obviously the first IRL Sword and Shield to Astral Radiance tournament, so pretty interesting stuff. We've got this and then we've got a couple of weeks of some other tournaments, and then we've got NAIC. So there's not many tournaments until NAIC now. So it makes sense to really sort of look at these results and try and analyse them and work out the direction that the meta is going. And as you can see, Palkia absolutely dominated this first regional. Typically these regionals in Australia do tend to have slightly skewed results based on sort of what the top players are playing, and you can see a lot of the top players, a lot of recognisable names here all the way through top 16. We're all playing Palkia, so it's not too surprising, but I think 8 out of 8 top 8 decks being Palkia definitely shows that it's a real force to be reckoned with, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty big part of the meta. So there's a couple of different Palkia lists that you can see did well. You can see that 4 players played the same 60. We've got Christian winning the tournament, Kaiwin coming second in a 60-card mirror match in the final, and then Brent and Natalie both playing it as well to top 8 and 16 finishes respectively. So yeah, this was the way they played Palkia. I think it's been dubbed kind of Turbo Palkia because it's not the Inteleon engine, it's not sort of the slower game plan of building combos with Inteleon and that kind of thing. It's instead using Celebration's Mew and trekking shoes, and really trying to burn through the deck as quick as possible. Really try to lean in on Radiant Greninja, concealed cards, drawing lots of cards, and just trying to boss turn after turn after turn. You can see that the list plays 4 Boss and 2 Melanie, and they're the only supporter cards in the list. So you can really tell that the idea behind the deck was just to basically really punish some 2-prize decks, or the 2 prizes that people are putting down, still with the ability to trade up against 3 prizes here and there. But in general, just being able to really race with a lot of these V Pokemon and V-Star Pokemon. And evidently, it was very successful. I've actually profiled this list on the channel already. I really enjoy this deck. It's a lot of fun. Like I say, it feels very different from the Inteleon engine. It's whilst you're still not attacking until turn 2, the same as Inteleon, it feels like you're motoring through the deck a lot quicker. And yeah, lots of attacking options as well. We've got a Suicune in here, we've got a Starmie in here, we've got a Greninja in here. So yeah, really impressive stuff. Diancie is the other big card that I think a lot of people haven't really been playing too much with. It's been in a couple of different decks, but I really think this is a really nice piece of the puzzle, to be honest. It helps you avoid getting bossed in the early turns to sort of lose that prize race, forcing a 1-prizer active to try and skew the prize race for your opponent. So you're always able to take 2 prizes, but the first prize they have to take in can be a Diancie if you can set up a board state that can get a Diancie into the active, which is pretty good. Obviously, this engine is kind of similar to the Dialga engine that ended up winning one of the larger online tournaments over the past couple of weeks, so it's not something we're super unfamiliar with. But yeah, really impressive to see it go all the way, so congratulations, Christian, on the win. And congratulations all 4 of these players that played the list. Because it seemed to be very successful. So yeah, Kaiwin played the exact same 60. I'm not going to go into all of these Palkia Inteleon lists, just because, as you can imagine, they're pretty similar. But we will, we'll take a look at all of them, but I'm not going to sort of dive deep into exactly what's in all of them. Just sort of the new cards, the differences for the most part. So we've got a couple of interesting things here. We've got the Ice Cube, which has that block face attack that helps with dealing with basic Pokemon. So the Reggie deck, the Blissey Miltank deck, none of these decks can get through Ice Cube, so a nice little addition there. You can see that Irida has been the engine of choice. I really like Irida, to be honest. It's a fantastic card, especially in this Inteleon build, because it basically can really unlock the majority of the deck. It can find Drizzles and Inteleons and stuff, as well as finding all the items, and then, you know, the Drizzles and Inteleons find the rest of the deck pretty much. So Irida really does unlock this deck, which is nice. A couple of interesting supporters here. We've got a Roxanne as well as a Leon. Leon is pretty interesting, trying to push through some of these higher HP Pokemon, trying to get all the way to sort of that VMAX range is pretty important, as well as just being able to pump the damage up here and there a little bit, rather than having to rely on choice belts, or in addition to choice belts, to again really kind of, if your opponent's playing around, sort of playing a small bench, that kind of thing, you still have some capability to go over the top and try and get the KO. Double cross switcher is pretty interesting. I've really liked cross switcher in the Inteleon build. I've been playing 4, so only playing 2 is pretty interesting. I don't mind it. We saw Arceus Inteleon do well in Australia with double cross switcher, so I don't mind it too much. It's very rare that you use all 4 anyway, but it's just nice knowing that you have access to, like, you're not going to be too worried about prizing it or anything. Though admittedly the deck doesn't discard that many cards that it doesn't choose to discard. There's only 1 research and that kind of thing, so it kind of works. There's no heavy discards in the deck. But yeah, again, a pretty standard list. There's a couple, like I say, there's a couple of interesting cards. The Rod and the Palpad also sort of stand out to me. But yeah, pretty standard as far as everything else goes, to be honest. And I think the majority of these lists are all pretty similar. This one, you can see, doesn't have a couple of these tech attackers. Still does have the Leon and the Roxanne, though. Playing that heavy ball. I really like the heavy ball in the list, just because Radiant Greninja is just such a strong card, to be honest. I want to be able to use it all the time. Playing the E-Rope instead of trying to find space for things like cross switches is interesting. Again, a big fan of cross switches personally, but I can see the space going to things like E-Rope, plus this list is playing a Horn, which is another card I really do like in the deck. So yeah, it feels like a lot of the Pokemon lines are pretty standard now, though. There's a couple of additions here and there, things like Starmie and that Ice Cube and stuff. There was a Crobat in the previous list as well, which is another thing to note. Henry Brand finishing top 8 again with Palkia Intel. Again, pretty similar support account, not playing the Leon. Again, not really playing any Gusting other than Boss, just focusing on the supporter lines instead, and then playing a Rope, as well as Tool Jammer. Tool Jammer is an interesting one. I think it is quite popular right now. There's the Zeraora that's going around that's kind of being used as a soft check to Palkia, but it can only get a KO if it has a choice belt on it. So Palkia with a Tool Jammer does survive a choice belted Zeraora, which is definitely worth noting. Admittedly, some of those decks are now moving towards Leon, which obviously plays around the Tool Jammer, so kind of have that debate in there as well. But yeah, you can see that it was pretty interesting. It's a pretty nice inclusion for the people trying to tech in a Zeraora for you. Henry's just was playing a Training Court instead of a Path of the Peak. As well as a Path of the Peak instead of the Temple of Sinnoh. Pretty good meta read from Henry. Obviously, Path of the Peak is still pretty strong, but Temple of Sinnoh, as you can see, basically none of the top 8, 9, well, the majority of the top 16. It turns out, I think, like 10 or so of the top 16, 9 or 10 of the top 16 don't play any energy that Temple of Sinnoh would actually affect. So, again, yeah, pretty good call there. But yeah, you can see a lot of these lists are fairly standard. This one playing the Starmie. I do really like Starmie. Still as an answer to Arceus, though. When we go back, you'll see there were no Arceus at all in top 8 or top 16, which is pretty impressive. That might be a first since Arceus is released, that it doesn't even get a top 16 at a tournament, which is pretty crazy. Starmie's still really useful in a lot of different situations. You can use Starmie after they've Star Portaled if they're trying to set up a couple of attackers, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I think Starmie's a nice little inclusion. Got the Irida engine again, and the 1 Battle VIP pass. Again, that's another nice one-off here and there. Obviously, you can't find space for all of these different cards, so you are going to have to make some trims here and there. But yeah, that's one I'm a big fan of. Big Charm also is another way of surviving a Zeraora, but you only survive it by 10, so they can obviously still ping you down. But yeah, Big Charm, again, just in general, it's a pretty strong card. Making your 2 prize at 310 HP is pretty gross, to be honest, especially combining that with something like a Roxanne in the late game to just say, you know, if you want to take these last couple of prizes, you're going to have to get through this Palkia that's absolutely monstrous. Yeah, again, nothing too crazy about any of these lists, to be honest. They're all pretty set. Brent was, again, playing the same list as the top 2 players. And finally, for the top 8, we had, again, another Palkia Intel. You can see all of these lists are sort of within 3 or 4 cards of each other. So there's nothing huge to write home about. If nothing else, it kind of just shows that the concept of Palkia in basically any form evidently is very strong. So yeah, ninth place was a Frosmoth Inteleon. A deck that I've actually played against a couple of times, just because a couple of European players, primarily Fabian, was playing this for a few weeks, and it's definitely really improved with basically just the inclusion of Greninja, to be honest, to help sort of ease the deck. Excuse me. So help sort of ease the deck's consistency worries, as well as just being a fantastic attacker to pair with Frosmoth. You got Starmie in there as well, which is nice. Played this Lapras as well, which is pretty interesting. If any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your last turn, you can leave them paralyzed. So again, combining that with something like a Mani can be a bit annoying. Typically, in general, it's just trying to be an Intel deck though, and trying to get a Frosmoth slowly in the on the bench in the back, trying to weave it in, and then really trying to push for some of these different attackers. Chrominable able to deal a large amount of damage once there is some damage counters on the opposing Pokemon, so you can sort of pepper them up with things like Inteleon, quick shooting, and the Aqua Bullet as well. And yeah, I mean, to me, just being able to cycle or trying to cycle Radiant Greninja seems incredibly strong. Obviously, you kind of fall down to a Manaphy in a lot of scenarios, but you have ways of you have like other attackers in the deck to be able to deal with the Manaphy and then eventually just try and chain Radiant Greninja, which is pretty impressive. Nessa gets back Greninja plus 3 energy, so if they're ignoring your Frosmoth, you're pretty capable of just sort of cycling Moonlight Shuriken over and over again. So yeah, a concept I'm really interested in trying out. Might try and adapt it a little bit, see what we can do with it. Again, plenty of space for different attackers as well. With the Frosmoth, you really are open to basically playing any water attacker you want. There's lots of different interesting inclusions. There's another Lapras, there's things like Suicune. You could even find space for something like a thin Palkia line in here to help ease the pressure off of Frosmoth, as well as with the Star Portal, as well as just providing a really solid mid-game attacker, or even early attacker, to be honest. So I wouldn't mind that too much. But yeah, really interesting deck. I've seen it in person, and it's a lot of fun to play and to play against. So one that I think I will be exploring going forward for sure. We had a Gengar VMAX make it all the way to top 16, which is pretty interesting. Kind of like a list we profiled on the channel, or we played in our early testing on the channel, where instead of relying on Houndoom, you're just relying on Dark Patch. Again, pretty similar engine to the Turbo Palkia list that did well. The Mew Celebrations engine with some trekking shoes, some Battle VIP passes, that kind of stuff to go kind of turbo, rather than trying to set up these stage ones that end up getting sniped or, ignored, and they just deal with your attacker. This makes Gengar a much more live threat, I think. It makes it a lot scarier to... If you can put double Gengar down, you can pretty reliably get a Gengar VMAX going on the following turn. And to be honest, it's still a huge Pokemon. There's really not much fighting type in the format right now. I feel like people are sort of teching for Arceus here and there, but you can play around things like Zapdos and stuff quite well, considering there's barely any Vs in the deck. And Urshi's, I really feel like Urshi's taken a bit of a hit recently just because of the existence of Greninja. Everyone's playing Manaphy anyway, right? So I think it's not a terrible time to be weak to fighting. There's not huge amounts of tech attackers that you're worried about. And yeah, Dark Patch is obviously an inherently incredibly strong card. You've got the Cross Switcher engine as well, which is, again, pretty nice when combined with Celebrations Mew. Makes it a bit more consistent to try and find. There's not that many supporters, which does scare me a little bit, because inherently Gengar has been an inconsistent deck, but we've seen this is a very similar engine to that Turbo engine that did well, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So I have a lot of faith that you'd be able to find the supporters pretty early, as well as just being able to cycle through your deck so quickly anyway. You'll be able to find them pretty easily. But yeah, again, another pretty interesting one. You've got to assume you have a pretty strong Mew matchup and things like that, which is always good. And you can play with a fairly low bench, which means you're hopefully able to sort of trade quite well into Palkia. GMAX Swallow Up does 250, so with a choice belt that's 280, which is a great number to be right now, as well as being able to move in and out with the cross switches, with additional switches, the nets, the hiding energy, all of this stuff to try and take 4 prizes with one Gengar, and then you've got things like Moltres to sort of close out the game. So yeah, very interesting list. I like it a lot. Way better than the Houndoom lists of old, in my opinion. So cool to see some innovations still there with Gengar. We had a Trekking Shoes list version of Mew, no catches, just going back to old school boss's orders, crams, phones, and then Trekking Shoes is the new inclusion. I think this is becoming kind of the standard list of Astral, to be honest. Going back to the double turbo energy, I think a lot of people have moved away from some of these special energy hating cards, things like Beedrill and Whimsicott, just because they really struggle against Palkia. So I think we've moved away from that meta, which means Mew can quite happily go back to a complete special energy build. And I think you're less punished for that as well, because Trekking Shoes kind of helps out with a lot of your... well, it helps you be a little bit more turbo, which is nice. And obviously with the Psych Energy, you do have the things like the training court to rely on in terms of being able to get your energy back. But with 3 double turbos, you're able to be a bit more liberal with them and still know that you have plenty of outs to them later on. Other than that, a pretty standard list. All of the ball search, the normal amount of supporters, playing the horn, playing double choice belt. 3 stadium I think is fine. I think we'll probably start to see more and more path, especially given that the winning list only played 1 Pumpkaboo. Whilst there's plenty of outs, you've got Nets, you've got Hisui and Heavy Ball, you've got lots of outs to finding a way to deal with path. I still think Heavy Path could be a part of this format going forward, so we might have to move back to 4 stadiums, at which point I'm pretty sure 4 Tower of Darkness would be better than 4 Rose Tower. I'm typically not the biggest fan of more than 2 Rose Tower anyway, so I think even at 3 I'd start thinking about moving towards Rose Tower anyway, and maybe just finding a space here and there. But yeah, other than that, a fairly standard list. Nothing too crazy to write about, just finding space for the Trekking Shoes, which helps, again, smooth over the decks. Well, not even smooth over, just turbo through the deck a bit more. This Mew list, as you can see, doesn't play the Trekking Shoes, but does indeed play the Pumpkaboo. Still playing the Marnie. This is like a pre-Astral list, so still evidently a pretty strong deck, even without any changes from Astral Radiance. So if you're a Mew player and you don't want to grab new cards, don't fret, because evidently you really don't have to. And then finally, the 1 Trekking Shoes build in here. All of these lists have played 3-3 Mew VMAX, which is interesting. I'm personally a fan of 4-2. 4-3 is like what I'm the biggest fan of, but my first cut is basically always the Mew VMAX. So 3-3 is pretty interesting. I don't mind it too much. Maybe it's something to try out, just because 2 VMAX does get a bit scary at times. But again, a lot of these lists are pretty standard. It's just trying to be Mew as consistent as possible, as many 4-ofs as possible, just trying to be the most aggressive deck in format and really try and lean on that fact. Natalie Miller played the same 60 as the finalists, so the final couple of lists we'll take a look at. First is this Inteleon VMAX list that played a Rapid Strike Squad Phalanx, which is pretty interesting. Obviously, Rapid Strike Squad does 20 times the number of your Rapid Pokemon, so you can do 120. I personally don't know why you would be too fussed about playing this. Obviously, it's really good into things like Arceus. They're probably not expecting you to drop a Phalanx down to try and take a hit on them, but it means you can't have any Drizzles on your board or Inteleons on your board, and you need to have built up some damage on Arceus and stuff like that. So it's only really good at taking 2 prizes on the basic version, on the basic V Arceus. It is pretty good at that, to be honest, with some additional damage here and there from things like the Double Gunner ability. Actually, no, you can't even use Double Gunner. So yeah, it feels like it's going to be really difficult to take a KO with this Phalanx. Maybe it's just in here to really just, apply a boatload of damage. But I feel like this deck has a solid game plan into Arceus anyway. So the only other thing I can think of is basically a Miltank counter, right? Trying to help with Miltank and help with Blissey and stuff like that. But I feel like you're running Inteleons. Inteleons do the job well enough. You can go pretty low to the ground against like a quarter Miltank deck. And against a Blissey deck, you're probably not out healing them. But I don't know that one inclusion of a Phalanx necessarily gives you enough sort of firepower to get through the couple of Blisseys they're going to be putting forward in front of you. You do have the Tool Jammer, which helps get rid of the additional HP from Cape. So maybe it is just enough. I feel like it's a hard sell, but maybe it is just about enough. That's the only thing I can think that this Phalanx is for, is just these sort of 1 prize matchups as another attacker. I guess against things like Regis, your main attacker is weak to lightning, so having another attacker could be pretty good. But yeah, it feels a little bit. It sticks out a little bit for me. I don't know whether it's whether it was super useful for this tournament, but yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, I never really got to play around with Inteleon too much, but I mean, being able to Roxanne Path or Cheryl Path still feels incredibly strong. So, and this clearly has a absolutely cracked Arceus matchup. To be honest, you've got to imagine it can do pretty well against Palkia as well, I guess, right? Because they're not capped, but it's really difficult for them to get up to 320. They need to. They do 260, 290 with the belt, so they need to. I mean, I guess the turbo lists were able to do it quite well because they have Ziggy and a load of scoop up nets. But yeah, it feels like Palkia is a bit capped. But even so, I feel like Palkia, like you're still two-shotting a Palkia, so you're still trading 2 for 2. But they have way more attackers than you, and they can sort of bully the Inteleon Vs a bit more than you can bully their Palkias and stuff. So whilst it feels like it has a similar sort of matchup to Arceus, pretty sure Palkia is just being a little bit more aggressive means that it's going to be tough. But yeah, interesting list nonetheless. I think the Phalanx to me is still one that I'm pretty interested in knowing whether it got immense value or not. And then finally, one more Palkia Inteleon list. Nothing too crazy again here, playing the Luminion for some of these one-of supporters. 5 one-of supporters actually, so really trying to fish out the correct supporter at the right time. These kind of lists not playing heavy ball is something that worries me. Well, I'm a big fan of heavy ball, especially in basically any deck with Radiant Greninja. I think it's an incredibly strong card, so I'd want to potentially find space for something like a heavy ball. But yeah, again, you can still see the Tool Jammer in here, the Horn in here, Palpad helping out with all of these one-of supporters. I think that's going to be the biggest question is kind of the supporter line in a lot of these decks. The majority of them haven't been running cross switches, they've been running boss, which is interesting. Again, still a big fan of cross switches, but you can't really ever argue with boss, especially given that the idea of the winning list was just a boss. So yeah, can't really complain. Pretty interesting tournament, as you can see. Like I say, Palkia was absolutely dominant. Yeah, Palkia was huge. I don't expect that to be the case in the next couple of tournaments. I think that was not necessarily expected, and especially not expected in the droves that it did well in. But I wouldn't expect 8 Palkias in Milwaukee or NAIC or anything like that. I think there'll definitely be 2 or 3 in a lot of these tournaments because the deck is absurdly strong. But you know, there's lots of other decks out there, so do not fret. We're not in a one deck format. I think there is still plenty of exploring to be done. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video soon. Cheers, everyone.